Have you ever wondered what happens when a cry for help, a single desperate message sent into the void, lands in the hands of a king? Not a king of castles and crowns, but one of shadows and steel, a man whose heart was long considered a casualty of his brutal empire. Can a monster learn to be a man again? And can the woman who accidentally summoned him survive the beautiful, terrifying consequences of his protection? Serafina Russo traced the angry red mark on her forearm, a welt left by the careless shove of a guard. A brute named Johnny whose cologne smelled of cheap whiskey and entitlement. It wasn't a burn from fire, but it burned all the same, with humiliation, with the searing heat of her own helplessness. She was a gilded canary in a diamond cage, collateral for her father's foolish debts to the most feared man in the city, Alessandro the Shadow King Falcone. Her gilded prison was his villa, a sprawling monument of marble and glass overlooking a city that both feared and worshipped its unseen ruler. In her hand, her phone felt like a forbidden artifact, a lifeline, a mistake waiting to happen. Her fingers trembled as she typed a message to the only person who had ever made her feel safe. Mom. The word was a prayer. He burned my arm. I'm so scared. She pressed send before her courage could evaporate. The blue bubble, a tiny flag of surrender sent out into the world. A moment later a reply chimed. So fast. Her mother was always so fast. But the message wasn't from her. It was from an unknown number, the text stark and devoid of comfort. 3 words that landed like gunshots in the silent, opulent room. I'll be there. A cold dread, colder than the marble floors beneath her bare feet, washed over her. Wrong number. Oh God, a wrong number. Who had she just invited into her secret misery? Who had promised to come? In the penthouse office that served as the heart of his criminal empire, Alessandro Falcone stared at his private phone, the one only 3 living souls had the number to. The message glowed on the screen, an anomaly in a device usually reserved for codes and kill orders. He burned my arm. I'm so scared. It was a splinter of raw, undiluted fear that had somehow pierced the armor of his world. It spoke of a vulnerability he hadn't encountered since his own childhood. A time before the world had taught him that softness was a liability punishable by death. He, the Shadow King, a man who moved fortunes and ended bloodlines with a single quiet command, felt a forgotten primal instinct stir within him. Protection. Possession. His reply was an impulse, a reflex forged in a lifetime of action. I'll be there. He didn't know who he was or who she was, but he knew this. Someone under his watch was being harmed, and that was an insult to his power, a crack in the foundation of his absolute control. He handed the phone to Luca Bianchi, his consigliere, a man with a face like a weathered map of their city's sins. Trace this. It came from a burner, but the signal is weak. Closed. Luca's eyebrows, thick and silver, furrowed. A problem, boss? Alessandro's jaw was a granite ledge. A problem I intend to solve. Personally, the trace was shockingly quick. The signal wasn't just close. It was originating from inside the villa itself. From the west wing. Serafina's wing. The air in the office crackled with a sudden lethal stillness. The canary. His canary. Someone had dared to touch what was his. The walk to her room was the longest of his life. His polished Italian shoes made no sound on the Persian runners, a predator stalking his own territory. When he opened her door without knocking, she flinched so violently she dropped her phone, the clatter echoing the frantic beat of her heart. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, were wide with terror. She thought he was the source of her fear. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He said nothing, his gaze sweeping over her, a silent inventory. He saw the tremble in her hands, the paleness of her skin beneath the soft glow of the lamp, and then he saw it, the ugly red mark on her delicate forearm. A king's rage is a quiet thing. It is not the roar of a lion, but the deadly calm of a storm's eye. His voice when it came was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Who? Serafina shrank back, wrapping her arms around herself. I tripped. I fell against the table. It's nothing, a lie. A foolish, brave lie meant to protect herself from his wrath. He knew the scent of lies better than he knew the scent of his own expensive cologne. He stepped closer, his shadow engulfing her. He gently took her arm, his touch surprisingly careful, his thumb brushing the edge of the angry skin. It was not a burn from a table. It was the shape of a man's thick fingers, A handprint. Do not lie to me, Passerato, he whispered, his voice a velvet threat. Little sparrow. Lying is a far greater sin than carelessness in my world. Tell me who put his hands on you. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering like captured starlight. The sight of them did something catastrophic to the ice around his heart. A single hot crack. Her voice was barely audible. Johnny. Your guard. I was in his way, Johnny. A brute. A disposable pawn. Alessandro released her arm and turned, his movements fluid and final. He pulled his phone from his pocket, not the private one but the one for business. He dialed a number. Luca, he said, his voice flat and cold as a morgue slab. Send Johnny on a permanent vacation. Effective immediately. And send a message to the others. What belongs to the Falcone family is to be treated with respect. Or it will be broken. He hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. He had just signed a man's death warrant as easily as ordering dinner, and the casual brutality of it stole the air from her lungs. He turned back to her, and for the first time she saw something beyond the ruthless dawn. In the depths of his storm-gray eyes, there was a flicker of something raw, something that looked almost like pain. In this house, he said, his voice softer now, a strange, rough-hewn apology, no one will ever harm you again. You have my word. He reached out, not to touch her, but to retrieve her fallen phone. He held it for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen, the wrong number text still visible. He deleted the entire thread, severing her accidental connection to him, severing the evidence. But it was too late. The connection was already made, not by technology, but by a shared moment of vulnerability and a terrifying possessive promise. He was the Shadow King, and he had just found the one thing in his kingdom of darkness that he might be willing to kill to protect. His little sparrow, and God help anyone who tried to clip her wings. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the villa shifted. Johnny was gone, vanished as if he'd never existed, and the remaining guards looked at Serafina with a new kind of deference, tinged with fear. They didn't see a prisoner anymore. They saw a protected asset, the personal property of Alessandro Falcone. He began to seek her out. He would find her in the library, her nose buried in a book, and he would simply sit in a nearby armchair, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. He brought her a first-edition copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, bound in dark green leather. A story about patience and revenge, he'd said, his eyes holding hers. Two things on which my family built its empire. She started to see the cracks in his marble facade. The way his jaw would tighten when he spoke of his late father. The subtle weariness in his eyes after a long night of whatever dark business he conducted. She, in turn, became his confessor. She didn't ask about his work, about the blood that surely stained his hands. Instead, she asked about the man. She learned he loved opera, that his mother had sung Puccini to him as a child. She discovered he had a scar above his heart, a pale white line from a betrayal long past, a story he refused to tell but whose pain was a ghost in the room whenever he looked at her for too long. His cousin Marco Verratti watched their growing intimacy with a venomous envy. Marco, with his hungry eyes and ambition that reeked of desperation, saw Serafina not as a woman, but as a weakness. A lever. Alessandro's Achilles' heel. She softens you, Cugino, Marco would say, a false concern lacing his tone. A king cannot afford to be soft. Alessandro's reply was always the same, a cold dismissal. She reminds me that I am more than just a king. One moonless night, Alessandro found Serafina on the balcony overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city. She wore a simple silk robe he had gifted her, the fabric shimmering like liquid moonlight against her skin. You look at the city as if you want to fly away, he murmured, coming to stand beside her. The scent of him, sandalwood and danger, enveloped her. I used to dream of escaping, she admitted, her voice a soft confession. Now, I'm not so sure what I'm afraid of anymore. Being a prisoner here or being free without you. The admission hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face, his calloused thumbs a stark contrast to her soft skin. His eyes were dark, intense, a tempest of emotions he had suppressed for a lifetime. You were never my prisoner, Serafina, he breathed, the words a raw, undiscovered truth. Sei il mio tesoro. My treasure. The part of my soul I thought I had lost. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of gentle romance. It was a kiss of desperation, of a drowning man finding air. It was fierce and possessive, a brand on her soul, a claim staked in a world of violence and shadows. In that moment she was no longer collateral. She was his, and he was hers. And in the shadows of the villa, Marco Verratti watched from a window, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He had found his lever. The king had a heart after all. And Marco knew exactly how to rip it out. The betrayal when it came was as swift and silent as a stiletto in the dark. A major shipment of illicit goods, one that represented a truce with the formidable O'Connell Irish syndicate, was hit. The cargo vanished and two of Alessandro's most trusted men were left dead in a back alley. A single white rose placed on each of their chests, the calling card of a long-dead rival family, the Bianchis, a name meant to sow chaos and distrust. But it was a ghost signature. The true artist of this carnage was Marco, who had meticulously planned every detail. The final masterful stroke of his plan landed on Alessandro's desk the next morning. A folder containing photographs. Grainy long-lens shots of Serafina meeting a man in a quiet cafe a week prior. A man who, to the untrained eye, looked like a low-level enforcer for the O'Connells. In reality, it was her cousin, a harmless university student she had secretly arranged to meet through a sympathetic maid. Desperate for a sliver of news about her family. But Marco had spun the narrative perfectly. The folder also contained bank records, expertly forged, showing a large deposit into her father's failing business account, timed perfectly after the meeting. The implication was clear. The canary had sung. She had sold him out to save her father. Alessandro stared at the photographs, and the world tilted on its axis. The scar above his heart, the one he never spoke of, began to ache with the phantom pain of a past wound ripped open. Years ago, a woman he'd loved had betrayed him in a similar way. Her greed leading to an ambush that had nearly cost him his life and had taken his brother's. He had sworn then over his brother's grave, that his heart would be a fortress impenetrable and cold. Serafina had breached his walls, and now it seemed, she had raised the castle from within. It's a lie, Luca Bianchi said, his voice firm, his old eyes sharp with a wisdom Alessandro's rage was blinding him to. The timing is too perfect. The evidence too clean. This is Marco's handiwork, I feel it in my bones, but Alessandro couldn't hear him. All he could see was Serafina's face in the photograph, her smile directed at another man. All he could feel was the ice reforming around his heart, thicker and more jagged than before. He stormed into the library where she was reading, the folder clutched in his white-knuckled fist. He threw it onto the table in front of her, the photos scattering like dead leaves. "Explain this," he snarled, his voice a venomous rasp she had never heard before. She looked at the photos, her face paling as she understood the accusation. "Alessandro, no. That's my cousin Leo. I just wanted to know if my mother was okay. The money? I know nothing about any money." Her plea was desperate, her honey-colored eyes wide with sincerity and terror. But all he saw was the ghost of his past. "Your mother," he spat, the words dripping with acid. "Or your father. Did he enjoy the price you fetched? Was my trust so cheap?" Every word was a physical blow. He was a cornered animal lashing out, the ruthless dawn eclipsing the man who had quoted poetry to her under the stars. "I would never," she began, tears streaming down her face. "You know I wouldn't." "I know nothing," he roared, sweeping a vase of roses from the table. It shattered against the wall, red petals and broken glass exploding across the floor. A perfect metaphor for what he felt was happening to his world. "I knew a girl who was afraid. I knew a woman who made me believe in something other than this." He gestured around the opulent room, a prison of his own making. "But I see now I only knew a liar." He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising, dragging her from the room. He wasn't the man who had gently tended her burn. He was the Shadow King, and she had committed the ultimate sin, betrayal. He locked her in her room, the heavy bolt sliding home with a sound of finality. He left her there with her sobs and the wreckage of their love, turning his back on the only light he had allowed into his darkness. He went to his office to mourn and to plan a war. And in the hallway, Marco Verratti listened to the sound of Serafina's cries and Alessandro's shattering world, and he smiled. The throne was almost his. While Alessandro drowned his pain in expensive scotch and war strategies, Luca Bianchi moved through the city's underbelly like a ghost. He didn't trust Marco, and he refused to believe the innocent fire in Serafina's eyes was a facade. He started with the maid who had helped her. Under pressure, the young woman confessed everything about the meeting with the cousin Leo. Luca then found Leo, a terrified art student who confirmed the story, providing text messages that corroborated the timeline. It wasn't enough. He needed to dismantle the lie about the money. He called in favors from old contacts, hackers who lived in the city's digital shadows. They traced the financial transfer. It wasn't from the O'Connells. The transaction was a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, but at its source, the digital fingerprints were unmistakable. It was Marco's personal slush fund. He had paid her father, not to buy his daughter's silence but to frame her. Marco had not just lit the match. He had built the pyre. Luca raced back to the villa, the evidence burning a hole in his pocket. He found Alessandro in his study, a map of the city spread before him, markers indicating the territories of his enemies. He was a man preparing to burn the world down to cauterize a wound in his soul. "You are about to start a war over a lie," Luca said, his voice cutting through the haze of whiskey and grief. He laid the evidence on the desk, the student's sworn statement, the maid's confession, and the damning financial trace. "Marco bought her father's cooperation to make it look like she betrayed you. He orchestrated the hit on the shipment. He is using your heart against you to seize your throne." Alessandro stared at the papers, his mind slowly, painfully processing the information. The rage did not subside, it transformed. The wild, wounded fury directed at Serafina now cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a lethal focus point aimed directly at his own blood. The betrayal was real, but he had been aiming his cannons at the wrong ghost. The true snake had been coiled at his feet the entire time. At that very moment Marco made his move. Believing Alessandro to be broken and distracted, he called a meeting of the family's capos, ready to present his own version of events, to paint Alessandro as a weak leader compromised by a woman. He intended to force a vote to stage a bloodless coup. But Alessandro was no longer broken. He was remade, forged anew in the fires of love and deception. He walked into the meeting room, flanked by Luca and his most loyal men, just as Marco was delivering his poisonous eulogy for Alessandro's reign. The room fell silent. Marco's face went white. There was no wounded lover in the room now, only the Shadow King in his full, terrible glory. "My dear cousin," Alessandro began, his voice deceptively calm, a predator's purr. "I appreciate you gathering all my captains for me. It saves me the trouble of hunting down any rats who might have considered siding with you." He laid the proof of Marco's treachery on the polished mahogany table for all to see. The silence was broken only by the rustle of paper as the capos saw the truth. Marco, cornered and desperate, pulled a concealed pistol. "You let a woman make you weak," he screamed, his ambition curdling into madness. But before he could even aim, Alessandro moved with impossible speed, the blur of his hand ending with a brutal crack as he disarmed his cousin. He did not kill him. Death was too quick a mercy. According to the old laws, Alessandro announced to the silent room, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "The penalty for betraying the family is not death. It is erasure." Marco was exiled, stripped of his name, his wealth, his identity. He was cast out, condemned to be a ghost, a nobody in the city that he had schemed to rule. Justice, cold and absolute, had been served. But Alessandro's final battle was not in that room of smoke and fear. It was down the hall behind a locked door. He stood before her room, the key feeling heavy in his hand. He opened the door slowly. Serafina was huddled on the window seat, her face stained with tears, looking like a broken doll. When she saw him she flinched, expecting more anger, more accusations. Instead, he dropped to his knees before her. The Shadow King, the ruler of a dark empire, knelt. He was covered in metaphorical blood and the grime of his own mistakes, his eyes holding a universe of regret. "Perdonami, cara mia," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Forgive me, my dear. I let the ghosts of my past blind me. I hurt you. I broke my own promise. He reached out, not to take but to offer. He held out his hand, palm up. A surrender. She looked at the powerful man kneeling at her feet, stripped of his pride, offering her the raw, bleeding truth of his heart. She saw the monster and she saw the man, and she realized they were one and the same, both desperately in need of something he had never known. Unconditional forgiveness. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Her touch was not one of submission, but of acceptance, of a partnership forged in fire and lies, and tempered into something unbreakable. There are a lot of ghosts in this house, Alessandro, she said, her voice quiet but strong. Maybe it's time we taught them to live in the light, and so they began. It begs the question, doesn't it? Can a love born from a mistake, a desperate text sent to the wrong number, truly rewrite the brutal code of the Mafia? Can a king of shadows learn to rule with a heart exposed? Perhaps the most dangerous thing in a world of guns and power isn't a rival family or a traitorous cousin, but the terrifying redemptive power of a love you never saw coming. What do you think? Can a heart like his truly change? Or is the darkness always waiting to reclaim its king? Let us know your most epic love story theories in the comments below. Share this with someone who believes in dangerous love, and tell us about a time a mistake led to something beautiful in your own life.